Welcome aboard. Welcome to Fishing Without Bait, a lifetime without definitive expectations. Hey, we're looking for individuals who are looking to create themselves rather than find themselves, to look at life and reality from another perspective and view life as an epic adventure. There's no admittance fee required, only the honesty, open-mindedness, and the willingness to try. Join our conversation and get acquainted with an eclectic roster of guests. Expect the unexpected and get an assist into exploding into your life with full impact mindfulness. Welcome aboard, my friends. I'm Jim Ellermeyer. I'm a behavioral health therapist. And today, as always, I'm joined by my good friend, co-host and producer of this program, Mr. Mike. Mr. Mike's with us. However, he's mute and he can't talk today. No, I'm just teasing. That's not a problem. So today we're joined by a Renaissance woman. We got acquainted through this young lady through our Twitter account at Without Bait. And as always, we're looking for fascinating people who are willing to explode into their own lives, who are willing to take risks, who are willing to fall down and get back up again, and have the courage to deal with fear and explore into their life. And today we're joined by Miss Natalie.
It is so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, would you pronounce your last name for us? It sounds just absolutely beautiful.
Yes, Bencivenga.
Bencivenga.
Yes,
Wow.
perfect.
Oh
yes,
my gosh,
you got
Bencivenga.
it.
Wow, doesn't that just flow off your tongue?
I always thought it did.
Did you ever think you'd be a Bencivenga?
I was born one, so I guess so.
Cool. It's always nice because we deal with so many heavy desert people in our life. It's a pleasure to be with somebody that has a bit of playfulness about them. That's
it's nice
cool.
to be here.
So, everyone's hatched and everyone's moved forward in time, and you have such an exciting journey that you've gone down many different paths. So tell us a little bit about where you were hatched at, Miss Natalie.
Yeah, so it's so funny. I always find the universe is an interesting thing because I've been dealing with the idea of transition a lot in my life right now. And the way that you just introduced me, I just thought, wow, that is really fitting to where my experience is right now. And it's almost like you're just picking up the energy that I must be giving off that things are changing, things are moving forward, and I'm excited about life. And
What did you just say? I'm
excited about life.
Cool.
I am.
Do you feel the tingle?
Oh yeah. I get the good chills, I
So
call them.
sometimes that's what we ask people. If they're not feeling the tingle of life,
Yeah.
if they're not tingling in their
Right.
life, then perhaps we might want to spend some more time together.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so my journey was I grew up in Oakmont, Pennsylvania, so a little suburb outside of Pittsburgh, which was a really idyllic little place to be. I don't think I appreciated it obviously at the time because when you're a kid, you don't like that your family knows literally everybody in town, and so everybody's kind of your parent. But looking back, it was such a wonderful neighborhood, and there was so much love there for me and my brother and my sister. But I ended up coming back into the city as an adult and went to Pitt.
Yes.
And
Tell us about your experience at Pitt.
yeah, it was wonderful. I studied my undergrad was in biology and philosophy, and I minored in chemistry. And I always loved science and math.
Sounds brutal.
It was, it was intense. But people always say to me, "Well, philosophy and biology, that doesn't seem like they go together," but they actually went together beautifully. Because the one you're understanding the how of life, and the other you're really questioning the why of life.
Mhm.
So they really integrated well. And I got into medical school, and I thought that was going to be my path. And I'd always been very, academically minded. So I just thought, well, smart kids go to medical school. My dad's a doctor. My mom's a nurse. I guess I'm going to medical school.
Okay.
But you know how you get those tingles in life, right? Well, that was probably my first true experience where I learned to listen to that inner voice.
Just say more about that.
Yeah. So the inner voice, I think, is really interesting because now I think at this point in my life, I'm almost 35. I'll be 35 in April. I realize that inner voice is really just my higher self telling me and talking to me. But when you're younger, I think you think that inner voice is more like your family or the people around you because you don't have that true sense of your own authority yet. But there was a voice inside of me that was saying, don't go to medical school.
This is an important point. I'd like to stop you right here for the folks who are listening to this show. Most folks, unfortunately, have an inner critic inside their head that's giving them a poor review of their life and their decisions. So some people call it higher self, some people call it whatever. We like to call it your authentic self.
I like
And
that.
that's what we help people find is their authentic self.
Yes. Oh,
So
yes.
say more about this authentic self talking to this imaginary person.
Yeah, I think it wasn't even so much as this higher self or more authentic self was talking to me as she was basically like badgering me because the more I tried to ignore it, the louder it got.
Was she badgering you or challenging you?
I think challenging me now that I
Mm.
look back. But at the time, I was more frustrated than anything because I thought I knew my path, and I've always been somebody that liked having. When I was younger, I thought, you need to have a path, you need to have a plan. That's how you find success. And I was always just I've always been a very organized person and diplomatic and very logical in the way I think.
So let's go back just a moment and let's talk about your path to medical school,
Hmm.
and let's talk about expectations.
Yes.
Sometimes we, and this is how we develop this concept of fishing without bait, of a lifetime
Hmm.
without definitive expectations.
Right.
When we have, there's a paradox in 12-step recovery that says
Mm.
the higher my expectations, the lower my serenity, and the lower my expectations, the higher my serenity. So it sounds like you might have had some expectations, I'm not putting words into this, that were placed upon you, or maybe you imposed upon yourself.
Well, my mom always said to me that I was always the one that put the most expectation on myself. I was like that even when I was a tiny kid. I had to be first. I had to do everything right. And I don't really feel looking back like I love my parents were, they pushed me to do my best, but I would not say that they were that critic in my mind. I definitely was my own critic. And the person that was pushing me like, no, you can't just get 100% on this test. You have to get 103%.
Okay.
So there was a lot of that going on. And then when you go into a situation where you're applying for med school and you're with other people that are basically mirroring that energy back to you, it becomes all consuming. And you really get caught up in what I realized looking back on it. I'm a competitive person. I realized I was doing this to win, not because I really necessarily wanted to do this because that was my life's
Mm,
work.
yeah. You wanted to win that.
That
Okay.
prize, whatever the hell that meant, looking back, the prize
Yeah.
of not sleeping and stressing and,
Well, that's the idea
but
when
learning.
when we talk about winning and we talk about the prize. First of all, we'd like to define that, and what is
Right.
it?
And I'm still searching for that.
Good,
I certainly don't
good,
have that answer yet.
good,
I'm getting a better idea of it, but
good.
inner peace is part of that for me, and finding happiness in things that aren't necessarily material, I think are important for me.
So the idea is no one ever really owns anything.
No.
Okay, everything can be taken away from you.
Oh yeah.
Your house can burn down, your
Yep.
car can be stolen, your business can fail.
Mhm.
However, what stays with you is your character.
That's right. And working towards building a person of integrity that you can look in the mirror and feel good about. That was something I think my parents instilled in me because my mother in particular never focused on outer appearance, which I look back on that now and I'm so grateful for that. She always used to me, it's nice to be pretty. It's much more important to be kind and compassionate and loving towards people. And so those were the ideals I grew up with and that I think have really cemented themselves into the
That's a
core of who I
difficult
am.
concept when you're 13 or 14 years old and you're in school and
Absolutely.
everyone is comparing themselves to others by the way that they look.
Oh, and I was incredibly bullied in middle school. Middle school was a very difficult time for me. It was really, really bad. But, my parents refused to let me leave school and they refused to let me be
Mm.
homeschooled. And my mom said, look, you're going to face a lot of tough things in your life and you have to learn to deal with it. And I remember being really upset at them at the time because I really was being bullied really badly. But looking back again, everything's perspective, right?
So
I'm grateful for those challenges.
this is the type of message that we're particularly looking to get out. When people adversity, it's not about, mainly people say, "We'll get over it, ignore them," things like that. That's
Right.
impossible.
No, you can't.
So it's really important to share with people, here's how I did this.
Yes. And how it
So
fueled you.
tell us about that.
Well, at the time, I think the part of the problem was, when you're 12 years old and you're going into a new school and you're leaving all of your friends and you're developed ahead of all the other girls physically,
Mhm.
it immediately brings you into a situation where there's a lot of slut shaming. You don't even understand that because you're 12. And then on top of it, you're academically levels above. And so you're breaking up the curve for the class so no one's getting a better grade and then the teachers are praising you in front of. So it was a combination of, the smart girl who's also,
They were
they're
jealous. They projected and said, "Let's throw stones at Natalie."
yeah, and then the boys jump on too, but they're sexually harassing you, right? And then you throw in a priest or two, and they're sexually harassing you in a different way. And
Mm.
you have a big,
Sexually harassing you in a different way.
yes, meaning the boys in the class are, being boys,
Suggestive writing.
right? But there were a few. I went to Catholic school, and there were a few priests that literally tried to corner me in specific spaces, and luckily I had a principal intervene before anything got out of hand. But it was that
Mm.
level of intensity every single day at school. And so I found my escape in writing, and I found my escape in writing books. I wrote novels when I
Okay,
was
so you
12.
found your escape through writing books. Say more about
Yes.
that.
Yes. Growing up, my dad was very creative. He was a musician. So we grew up with a lot of music in the house. Frank Sinatra, the Beatles. This was like my musical education as a kid, and I loved it. And as I got older, that was the creative arts were such a place for me to heal and find, a sense of empowerment. And writing became a huge part of that. And I remember for a gift, I begged my parents to buy me a typewriter because I wanted a typewriter. I loved the sound of a typewriter. I thought it was really cool. And I would sit after I'd finish homework and I would just sit up in my room and just write and write and write. And I wrote really violent stories. Really, like, were not my character at all, but I think I was trying to work through a lot of my
Yeah, that was
emotions.
a lot of rage inside
I
of
had
you.
a lot of anger, and it was a great outlet, and I wrote then I started writing a lot of poetry, and that was really interesting, and I still love to write poetry to
So
this
you were
day.
had a cathartic type of
Yes.
experience there.
Yes.
So when you're dealing with young ladies and they come up to you and they say, "Hey,
Yes.
this stuff did happen to you. It
Mhm.
is happening to me."
Yes.
What do you say to them?
You know, when I worked as a therapist, I dealt with young women who were going through much worse than I ever went through. And I think part of therapy and part of finding yourself is finding yourself outside of the way in the world, in the way that the world frames you, and trying to reframe yourself. And so for me, that was, I found myself through the creative world. And so I really encourage a lot of
Wonderful.
people, a lot of young girls to start being creative, even if they say, "Oh, I'm a terrible writer. I don't know how to paint." Who cares? It's not even about that. No one ever has to read this. I journaled my whole life. It's about finding a place for your thoughts that you own, that you can reflect on, that you don't have to worry about how anyone else is perceiving you, and so how you can start to shape who you want to be.
So we help people understand, like you and I discussed earlier, that flowers don't compare themselves to other
That's right.
flowers. They just
They just bloom.
bloom. Okay.
And I try to let young women know um, that you can be a beautiful flower, and other flowers around you can be just as beautiful, and that doesn't negate or take away from you. And
So what
and
are the
there's a lot of competition,
yeah
in that sense. And so I think it's important that we focus on, just because other things are beautiful around you, that has nothing to do with how beautiful you are.
well, beauty's an essence.
It is. It is.
That's what
Yeah.
Plato said. So the idea is that what are the three things it takes a flower to bloom? Three things.
Oh, I mean, you have to have water, right?
Hmm.
You have to have sunlight,
Hmm.
and you have to have soil or the earth.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So when we practice this holistic type of
Mm-hmm.
wellness,
Mm-hmm.
we consider the water taking care of your physical body.
Yeah.
And we consider the sunlight, and I use 12-step terms, we call it the sunlight of the spirit. That means a
Mm-hmm.
connection with
Yes.
something,
Yes.
whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then the soil is the environment, the people, places, things, situations that you choose
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
place yourself in.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and that's really important because you have choices as you grow up, right? You have a lot of you begin to have more choices in who and how you want to place yourself.
So fortunately, you had a supportive
I
environment
did.
that advocated for that and reinforced that.
Mm-hmm.
So do you remember? You ever remember when you heard your recorded voice played back to you, Natalie?
Yeah.
How'd it sound?
I you know That's an interesting question. I think at first you're almost like, "Is that me? Do I sound like that?" especially when you've not really heard it before. It's an interesting thing. And sometimes it sounds like the way you thought it would, but it also doesn't.
So sometimes we ask people to speak the words out loud. I
Hmm.
am, I
Yes.
choose. And
Hmm.
you and I talked earlier about young ladies in particular not
Hmm.
putting a profile out about what they have to offer, which is so sad. But however, what are the requirements it takes to be with me?
Right. Flipping the script, which I think is really challenging because we were talking about this a little bit before we started about I think we're conditioned women are conditioned to be relational. We're supposed to be thinking we all the time, but it's okay to think about me. And there is a difference between selfish and self-interested. You have to be self-interested in order to thrive in the world.
Well, I'm sure that you've been on many jets flown around. So when the flight attendant comes out and gives the oxygen mask instructions,
Right?
who do they tell you to put it on first?
Exactly. You have to put it on yourself first.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Mhm.
So sometimes we irritate people, and I really don't care because I'm not running the friendship club. So we ask people uh, we suggest to them that it's not being a mama or a daddy or a brother or a sister or a friend or a partner or an employer or an employee that defines who you are. It's your values and your choices and your non-negotiables that define who you are.
Exactly, because you have to look in the mirror. You have to be okay with the person that you see.
Well, who do you spend more time with other than
I
yourself,
agree.
Natalie?
I know. It's right. You have to get really comfortable with who you are.
Yeah, yeah. So that sounded like a tough transition for you.
It was. But it's funny. That was a tough transition and deciding not to go to medical school was a tough transition because the medical school application process was the most challenging thing I've done academically. And I remember after that experience, I thought, if I can make it through sitting in those interviews with that terrifying panel of really important people staring at me, and they still wanted me at the end of that experience, I can do anything. And so I think it's really important that we challenge ourselves and get out of our comfort zone and do things, even if we decide not to do them at the
Ah,
end of the day, to just say, I can.
say
And I
more about that
did.
comfort zone, Natalie.
Well, I think it's really easy to just do sort of the bare minimum of living, because life is hard. Okay. Relationships are hard. Work is hard. Everything can be difficult, but you can also choose to look at it as an
I
adventure.
love your wording. So the idea is that does any growth take place inside a comfort zone?
No, I don't believe so.
So our job is to frustrate people enough. When we
Yes.
consider people like a balloon
Yes.
with an infinite capacity for expansion,
Yes.
and we try to irritate them enough that
Hmm.
they bump up against
Exactly.
their comfort zone.
And my question sometimes I've had this conversation with just friends, and it's like, aren't you just bored? I mean, I get bored after a while doing this. It's like, okay, I've mastered this level. It's like a video game, right? What's next? How do I level up here? I want to do something new. I want to challenge myself. I want to feel something, you
There is
know?
no end. There is no finish
No,
line.
no, you just kind of can't continue to evolve. And, I think that's what concerns me about what's going on in the world today is we're not allowing people to really evolve. We're taking sometimes what people said many years ago and holding them into the same space. We're not allowing people to grow. And I think it's really important that we all acknowledge that we're hopefully not going to be the same people that we were 10 years ago. Hopefully we'll have grown into more compassionate and loving and interesting people, and people that can then give to others.
So we talk about often how people differentiate between emotional mind choices and wise mind choices.
Mm.
So emotional mind is reactive,
Mhm.
waterful. It's like a little kid at a
Right.
counter at the grocery store that
Mhm.
grabs the shiny thing and won't let
Yeah.
it go.
Yeah.
Okay. And a lot of times we make these reactive type of choices in life.
Mhm.
Okay. So, but emotions are wonderful. They color
Right.
our world. They
Right.
are our internal barometer. They tell me how you are, how I am. And
Mhm.
then there's logical minds, okay, rational
Mhm.
minds, and they're checkbook minds, black and white logic. And the best example that we give for a logical, rational mind is that Jim and Natalie decide to feed the starving children.
Mhm.
Logical choice, right?
Mhm.
However, without adding any emotion to it, we spend the next 6 months trying to decide whether to feed the boys first or the girls first.
Mm.
Okay. So, and then we get into that wise mind where we learn how to respond rather than react.
Right.
Okay. We do that in this world, we call it cognitive distancing.
Mm-hmm.
And the Stoics call it studied indifference, a view from above, whatever you want to call. Everything's a buzzword. Okay, it's just repackaged.
Everything's just a hashtag.
Nothing's really new. But then we get into that wise mind, and people think wise mind choices would be the obvious ones, the no-brainer ones.
Mm-hmm.
Wise mind choices can be difficult and have pain attached to them.
Absolutely.
So tell us about some of these wise mind choices, particularly the medical school issue.
Yeah. So getting back to the fact that we were talking about a little earlier, just something inside of me saying not to do it. Maybe there was, like we were talking about, the more authentic self, because I don't understand even to this day what really propelled me, because I was on a path that would have made sense on paper, but I wouldn't have the life that I have now had I made those choices. And I don't think I would have grown as much as of a person had I made that choice, because that map would have been laid out for me, and it would have been a very straight road, and it would have been a life that I think would have been fine. And I don't really want to live a life
It might have
that's
been
fine.
comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that was the beginning of learning how to take risk for me.
Taking risks.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Most people stay in situations not because they're comfortable, because
Right.
they're familiar.
Exactly. And I think that's really important to be able to decipher, am I really happy here, or is this just what I'm used to? Is this just, the space in which I'm most comfortable or most familiar?
So it sounds like you've learned how to speak to yourself like you were speaking to a friend.
Yeah, and that's taken time, because you were talking about the inner critic. Well, my inner critic was definitely, probably that 12-year-old, one of those 12-year-old girls, right? And over the years, and I really credit yoga and going to get my master's in social work to learning how to tell her not to silence her, because I don't think that's the just telling her to sit down. Like, you don't have to speak for me now. I'm in the adult here now, and learning how to listen to the authentic self versus the critic.
Well, the idea is that when we help people understand that voice comes from somewhere, and
Right.
it's not them.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And the authentic self is you.
So I don't teach thought suppression. I don't teach thought blocking.
Right.
We can address that and say,
Yes.
thank you for your input. However, here's what I
Exactly.
choose to do.
Exactly. You're not, or as how I like to say it, you're not in charge anymore.
I'm sure that there's been many meetings where you've been at where you've had some unruly whoever, and people come up with all these ideas. Then the person who was actually running the meeting will step and say, I heard each one of you. Thank you so much for your input. However, this is the direction we're going.
Yes. And I remember one of my teachers saying once, you don't have to listen to every thought that pops into your head. You can acknowledge it, but you don't have to listen to it. And I thought that for me was like kind of mind blowing at the time when I heard that.
This is what we help people do. We understand that, our brains are nothing but masses of organic goo. They're data repositories.
Yes.
Our minds are the things that shapeshift, sort, grade the thoughts. And our authentic selves, the I self, the myself, is the thing that stands back and looks at it and chooses how much of this drama do you participate in.
Right. And
just because you have a thought doesn't make it true.
Well, exactly. And learning that, I think, has been an ongoing process as well, because we're just inundated with so much information anymore too.
Please check out our website at fishingwithoutbait.com, where you can listen to the show, comment on our discussions, and find out where you can subscribe to our podcast. If you're interested in flying the colors of Fishing Without Bait, click the shop icon on our website. We have clothing, mugs, cell phone cases, and so much more. Show the world that you fish without bait. This show is a member of the Sorgatron Media Podcast Network. Find out more at sorgatronmedia.com.